She woke up to the soft glow of morning sunlight filtering through her window. The mountains outside, still touched by the early mist, looked peaceful and quiet. Today felt like any other, yet there was a strange sense in the air, a pull she couldn't quite name. She had always loved the mountains. They were her escape, her quiet place to think when the world felt too loud or too fast. Packing her backpack with essentials water, some snacks, a first aid kit, and a light jacket, she set out, humming softly to herself. The crisp morning air brushed her cheeks as she walked the familiar trail. Her boots crunching against the gravel and fallen leaves, the path wound through the tall pine trees, their scent sharp and refreshing. Birds called from the branches above, and a squirrel darted across the path, pausing briefly as if to watch her. She smiled, feeling at ease. Hiking alone was something she had always enjoyed. There was a freedom in it, a chance to listen to herself without interruption, to notice the small details that often went unseen. As she climbed higher, the trail became steeper, winding around rocky outcrops and narrow ledges. She paused for a moment on a flat stone, taking in the view. The valley stretched below her, dotted with tiny houses and winding rivers. It was beautiful, but it was also quiet in a way that made the world feel very small. She took a deep breath, savoring the freshness of the air, and continued upward. That's when she saw him. At first she thought it might have been a trick of the light, a shadow cast strangely among the rocks. But as she looked closer, she realized a man was lying on the slope a few meters away, half hidden behind a boulder. His movements were slow, pained, and unsteady. Something about the way he was lying there didn't seem right. Her heart quickened. "Hello?" she called softly, stepping closer, careful not to startle him. She kept her voice calm, gentle, though her pulse was racing. The man stirred slightly but did not get up. He groaned, a low sound that made her stomach tighten. She could see that his clothes were torn and dirty, and his face was pale. His eyes, when they opened, were unfocused, scanning the trees around him as if he were trying to remember where he was. Without thinking, she ran down the slope toward him, her boots slipping on loose stones. "Are you okay? Can you stand?" she asked, reaching him and kneeling beside him. He shook his head slightly, wincing as he moved. She could see a cut on his arm, blood dried along the edges. His leg was twisted awkwardly beneath him. It was clear he had fallen or slipped somewhere above. "Don't worry. I'm here. I'll help you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, even as her hands trembled. She scanned the area quickly, looking for a safe path to help him move. The slope was steep, and loose rocks made every step dangerous. She knew she had to act carefully, but she also couldn't leave him alone. "Can you walk?" she asked gently, placing a hand on his shoulder to support him. He tried to rise, but a sharp groan escaped his lips. His face twisted in pain, and he shook his head. She nodded, understanding. She had to carry him or find another way to get him down safely. "Okay, we'll do this slowly," she said, scanning the surroundings for a more stable path. She found a narrow ledge that led down toward a flatter area. It would be tricky, but it was possible. She took a deep breath, then helped him to his feet. He leaned heavily on her, and she could feel his strength was minimal. Each step was careful, slow, as she guided him down. As they moved, she asked softly, "What happened? How did you get hurt?" He tried to answer, but his voice was weak, broken, and difficult to understand. She didn't press him. Right now, getting him to safety mattered more than words. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small clearing where the ground was more level. She helped him sit on a fallen log and took a moment to catch her own breath. He leaned back, exhausted, and she could see the strain in his eyes. She offered him water and a small snack from her bag. He took them slowly, almost mechanically, as if trying to gather strength. "You're doing okay," she said softly. "We'll get you down safely. You don't have to be afraid." He nodded faintly, but his eyes remained distant, thoughtful. There was something unusual about him, something quiet yet intense, as if he were not just a man in need of help, but someone carrying a deeper weight. She didn't understand it yet, and she didn't have time to think too much. Her focus was on keeping him alive, as the morning sun rose higher. Warming the rocks and trees, she continued her careful descent. She supported him every step of the way, talking gently, encouraging him. She learned his name, though it felt almost ordinary compared to the strangeness of the situation, but he didn't offer much about where he came from or why he was there. There was a mystery in him that intrigued her, even in this moment of danger. The forest around them seemed peaceful, it's almost untouched, but the reality of the situation was urgent. She had to navigate loose rocks, slippery moss, and steep drops while keeping him steady. Every so often, he would slip or wince in pain, and her heart would race. But she refused to panic. Panic wouldn't help them. Only focus, only careful movement could get them through this alive. After several hours of painstaking movement, they finally reached a safer path that led down toward the town below. Her legs were sore, her arms ached from supporting him, but she felt a sense of relief. The danger was not over, but they were no longer in immediate peril. She could see houses in the distance, people moving about their day, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in the mountains above. She glanced at him. He was pale, tired, but still breathing steadily. She offered a small smile. "We're almost there. You're safe now," she said. His eyes met hers briefly, and for a moment, she felt a strange connection, a silent acknowledgement of trust, gratitude, and something unspoken that passed between them. She didn't know who he really was, or what story lay behind those eyes. But she knew this moment mattered. By the time they reached the edge of the town, the sun was high in the sky. She helped him to a small bench near the trailhead. He slumped down, exhausted but alive. People passed by, curious glances, but she ignored them. All that mattered was that he was safe. She offered him more water and some energy bars she had in her pack. He accepted them quietly, nodding in thanks, as she sat beside him, letting him rest. She thought about the strange twists of life. A morning hike had turned into a rescue mission, and yet she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had acted without hesitation, without thinking about herself. There was something deeply human in this act, something that connected her to the world in a way that ordinary days rarely did. He finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "Thank you for helping me." There was a sincerity in his tone that touched her deeply. "Don't know what I would have done without you." She shook her head softly. "Anyone would have done the same," she said, though she wasn't sure if that was true. Few people would have risked the mountain for a stranger. But she didn't seek recognition. The act itself mattered more than anything else, for the first time. She had a moment to look at him fully, to see the details she had missed in the rush of the rescue. His clothes were rugged but neat, and despite the dirt and scratches, there was an air of calm dignity about him. He carried himself in a way that was quiet, controlled, yet strong. Something about him was different, and she felt a flicker of curiosity. Who was this man? What had brought him to this dangerous place alone? She wanted to ask, but she also respected the silence. Sometimes words were not necessary. They sat together for a while, the hum of the town below filling the space between them. She watched him drink and eat slowly, recovering his strength. And as she did, she realized that this encounter, this strange, unexpected meeting, would stay with her. It was the beginning of something she could not yet understand, a story that was only starting to unfold. A connection forged in the mountains, in the quiet moments of trust and care. Eventually, she stood, brushing off her hands. "We should get you somewhere safe, maybe a place to rest, or someone to check your injuries properly." He nodded, and together they started toward the small clinic at the edge of town. She stayed close, ready to support him again if needed. As they walked, she couldn't help but think about the unpredictability of life. One moment, the day had been ordinary. The next, it had been extraordinary. She had saved a man in need, and in doing so, she had stepped into a story far larger than herself. And though she didn't know it yet, the man she had helped was no ordinary stranger. And the events that had begun that morning would change both of their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The small clinic smelled of antiseptic and faintly of flowers from a vase near the reception desk. The woman helped the man inside, guiding him carefully to a chair in the waiting area. His steps were slow, unsteady, but he leaned on her with trust that seemed both quiet and unspoken. She could feel the tension in his body as he tried to stay upright, every movement cautious. As though he were afraid of breaking further, a nurse came over immediately, concern written across her face. "Is he okay? What happened?" she asked. The woman explained quickly, detailing the fall on the mountain trail and the man's condition. The nurse nodded, motioning for him to come further inside. The woman stayed close, guiding him, making sure he didn't stumble. As he sat on the examination table, she finally took a moment to breathe herself. Her arms ached from supporting him down the slope, and her legs felt like lead, but there was relief. Relief that he was alive, relief that the danger was over, and relief that she had managed to help him when it mattered most. The nurse gently examined him, checking his cuts, bruises, and joints. The woman watched closely, noticing every detail, every wince of pain he tried to hide. "You're lucky," the nurse said quietly to him, "that you didn't slip further. This could have been much worse." The man's face was pale, but his eyes, though tired, held a sharp clarity. He tried to smile faintly at her, a gesture of thanks. "Thank you for not leaving me there," he said softly. His voice carried a quiet strength despite the weakness in his body. She shook her head. "I couldn't. No one deserves to be left in danger. I just did what anyone should." She felt a warmth inside, a strange pride in doing something good without expecting anything in return. But deep down, there was also curiosity. Who was this man? Something about him felt unusual, almost out of place, as if he carried a life far different from the one he showed in this quiet moment. The nurse cleaned his wounds carefully, applying antiseptic and bandages. He flinched slightly when the cold touched his skin, and she reached out instinctively, resting a hand on his arm. "That's all right. It's almost over," she said gently. He nodded again, a small, almost imperceptible movement that showed his trust. Once the nurse finished, the man was helped to a chair near the window. He sat quietly, sipping water she had brought him. The sunlight fell across his face, highlighting the lines of exhaustion and pain, but also something else in intensity, a quiet resilience that seemed to radiate from him. She couldn't stop herself from observing him, trying to piece together the story behind the man who had appeared so suddenly on the mountain trail. After a while, the nurse left, leaving them alone. "Do you want to talk?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Not yet," he murmured. She nodded, understanding. Some things could not be rushed, and trust could not be forced. She sat quietly beside him, letting him rest, letting him gather strength. Time passed slowly, marked only by the sound of the town outside and the occasional footsteps of people moving through the clinic. She offered him small snacks from her bag energy bars, fruit and water. He accepted them slowly, carefully, and she could see that he was regaining some strength with each bite. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke again. I don't know how to thank you," he said. His voice was low, but sincere, carrying a weight of gratitude that touched her deeply. "You saved me. You didn't even know me." She shrugged, smiling faintly. "I didn't have to know you. I just couldn't leave you there," she realized. That her words were more than just an explanation, they were a reflection of her belief in human kindness. In helping without expectation, he studied her for a long moment, as if trying to understand something about her. "It's rare," he said quietly, "to find someone who acts like that. Most people think first of themselves." She felt a mix of surprise and curiosity at his words. He spoke with knowledge, with observation, as if he had seen much of the world and understood human nature deeply. "Maybe," she said softly. "Or maybe people just haven't met someone who needed help badly enough. I only did what I could." He nodded, and for a moment, silence settled between them. It was a comfortable silence, filled not with awkwardness, but with the understanding that sometimes words were not necessary. They were two strangers connected by circumstance, by an event that had demanded courage, and by a shared humanity that transcended ordinary conversation. As the day wore on, she helped him arrange for a room where he could rest. He declined to go to the hospital for further treatment, insisting he only needed rest and care. She guided him to a small, modest inn nearby, arranging for the room and helping him settle in. She made sure he had water, blankets, and a quiet space to recover. Once he was settled, she stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. The town below hummed with life children running, shopkeepers calling out greetings, and the distant sound of a train whistle. Yet her mind remained on him, on the man she had rescued. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. Something about his calm, measured demeanor, the way he seemed both cautious and aware, hinted at a story she did not yet know. She returned to check on him periodically. Each time he seemed a little stronger, a little more himself. They began to talk quietly, small conversations at first. About ordinary things, the weather, the trail, the beauty of the mountains. His voice remained soft, but there was a depth to it, a careful thoughtfulness that intrigued her. He avoided talking about himself, yet in his words and in his pauses, she sensed a life that was more complex than she could imagine. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, he asked her, "Why did you help me?" It was a simple question, but she paused, considering how to answer. "I don't know exactly," she said finally, "I suppose. Because someone needed help. Because it was the right thing to do. Because I couldn't imagine leaving you there alone." Her voice carried sincerity, and she realized that she meant every word. He nodded slowly, as if absorbing her words, as if the simplicity of her answer carried a meaning deeper than either of them could articulate. There was a quiet dignity in him, a recognition of her honesty, and it made her feel a strange connection. To him, a sense of understanding that went beyond words. Over the next few days, she continued to care for him as he recovered. She brought meals, helped with small tasks, and spent time simply being there, a comforting presence. They shared quiet moments, watching the mountains, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, and noticing the small details of life in the town. Though he remained reserved, she began to notice subtle things: how he observed people, how he moved with careful attention, how his eyes reflected both thought and experience. There was an intelligence in him, a depth, and she realized that he was not an ordinary man. Yet she did not push, did not ask too much. She knew that some things revealed themselves in time. One afternoon, as they sat together by the window, she asked, "Do you often hike alone?" He looked out at the mountains for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes it helps me think, helps me remember." There was a shadow in his voice, a quiet sadness, but also a strength. She sensed that his life had not been easy, that the mountains were both a refuge and a challenge he sought deliberately. She nodded, understanding more than he realized. "I know what you mean. The mountains. They make you feel small, but in a good way. They remind you what matters." He turned to her then, and for a brief moment, their eyes met fully. There was a silent acknowledgement between them, a recognition of shared humanity, of courage, and of the fragile strength it took to care for others. He did not speak, and neither did she. But the moment was profound, filled with understanding that went beyond words. As evening fell, she helped him prepare for the night. He seemed stronger, steadier, and more comfortable in his own body. She felt a sense of relief and quiet satisfaction, knowing that her efforts had made a difference. Yet at the same time, her curiosity grew. Who was he, really? What story did he carry behind those calm, measured eyes? For now, she decided it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was safe, that he was alive, and that she had been there when it counted. The rest, the mystery, the questions, the unknown, could wait. And so, as the night settled over the town, with the mountains casting long shadows in the moonlight, they rested. Two strangers connected by circumstance, by courage, by a moment of pure human kindness. And though neither could yet see what lay ahead, both felt the quiet knowledge that their lives had changed in some small, meaningful way, and that this encounter, simple as it seemed, was only the beginning of a story far larger than either could imagine. The days passed slowly, each blending into the next as he regained strength. The woman visited him daily, bringing small meals, fresh water, sometimes a book or two she thought might interest him. At first, he barely spoke, conserving energy and staying quiet. But gradually, he began to respond to her questions, sharing small details about his life, carefully choosing his words. Never giving too much away, she noticed the way he looked at the world around him. Always observing, always quiet, yet fully present. When they sat by the window, he would watch people passing by in the streets, the way the children laughed as they ran home from school, the shopkeepers arranging goods in their windows. He seemed to notice things that others overlooked: the pattern of clouds, the faint sound of a bird's call, even the rhythm of the footsteps of strangers. It fascinated her. "Do you always pay attention to so much?" she asked one morning as she set a cup of tea on the small table in front of him. He smiled faintly, a small curve of the lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I notice," he said quietly. "It helps me understand things, people, places, even myself." She nodded, intrigued. There was a quiet depth to him, a patience and thoughtfulness that seemed to have come from a life far larger than hers. Yet, there was also a sense of sadness, something beneath the surface that he did not reveal. She didn't push, not yet. She knew that some things revealed themselves in time, and that trust had to be earned. One afternoon, the two of them went for a short walk. He insisted he needed to stretch, and she agreed, happy to help him get back some strength after days of rest. The path was gentle, a small trail leading from the inn to the edge of town. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating patterns on the ground. Birds chirped in the trees, and the smell of fresh pine filled the air as they walked. She noticed his cautious movements, the way he tested each step before putting weight on it. "You're getting stronger," she said encouragingly. "You'll be able to walk the mountains again soon." Shook his head faintly, a small smile on his lips. "Maybe," he said. "But I'm not sure I want to climb yet." "Not after that." His voice was low, almost a whisper, and she sensed the weight of his words, though he did not elaborate. She didn't ask. Some stories, she knew, were not meant to be rushed. They reached a small clearing overlooking the town. The view was beautiful, the valley stretching out below, rivers glinting in the sunlight, and the mountains rising in the distance. He sat on a rock, and she settled beside him. They were silent for a while, watching the world below, letting the quiet settle around them. "You saved me," he said finally, his voice breaking the silence. I don't know how to repay you."
"You don't need to,"
she replied gently. "I only did what anyone should. It's not about repayment." She turned to look at him, studying his face. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes, a story that he did not tell, and she felt drawn to it. Though she didn't yet understand why, he nodded slowly, looking out at the valley again. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did," he said quietly. "Most people would have left me." She shook her head. "Maybe. Or maybe most people haven't met someone in need at the right moment. I just happened to be there." She felt a small laugh rise in her chest, a mixture of relief and amusement at the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. You're not like others," he said softly. "You see people even when they're broken or hurting. You act without thinking of yourself. That is rare." She felt warmth rise in her chest at his words, but also a little unease. His observation was accurate, too accurate. There was something about him that made her feel both comfortable and unsettled at the same time. She didn't know why, but she decided not to think too much about it. Over the next few days, they continued to grow accustomed to each other's presence. She helped him regain his strength, and he began to participate more actively in small tasks. They cooked simple meals together, sometimes shared quiet conversations, sometimes sat in silence. Watching the changing light on the mountains, she began to notice more about his small habits, little gestures that seemed ordinary yet hinted at a life of discipline and care. The way he held a cup of tea, the careful way he arranged utensils, the thoughtfulness in his movements. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable to anyone else. But she saw it, and it made her even more curious about him. One evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of orange, and the first stars began to appear. He asked her a question that caught her off guard. "Why do you spend so much time helping others?" he asked quietly. She thought for a moment, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I guess. I just feel like it's the right thing to do. If you can help someone, why wouldn't you?" He nodded slowly, considering her answer. "Most people don't think that way," he said. "They think about themselves first." "Maybe," she replied softly, "but I think the world would be better if more people did." She looked at him then, meeting his eyes. For a brief moment, she saw something flicker there, recognition perhaps, or understanding. It was fleeting, but it left her wondering what he meant. As the night grew darker, they returned to the inn. She helped him settle in, arranging blankets and pillows to make him comfortable. He rested back, sighing with relief at being able to relax without pain. She sat nearby, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and curiosity. She had done what she could to help him, and yet she felt there was more to the story, something he had not shared the next morning. She brought him breakfast and found him already awake, gazing out the window at the mountains. He turned to her, a small smile on his lips. "I feel stronger today," he said. "Thank you." "You're welcome," she said, smiling back. "I'm glad to see it." They spent the day slowly exploring the town, a small adventure to stretch his legs and give him some fresh air. People passed by, curious glances, but he didn't seem to notice or care. He walked with careful attention, always aware of his surroundings. But there was a quiet ease about him now that hadn't been there before as they walked. She noticed moments when his expression changed. A flicker of something she couldn't quite place, thoughtfulness perhaps, or memory. He didn't speak of it, but she sensed it. It made her more determined to respect his privacy while still being there for him. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains once more, they returned to the inn. He asked if she would sit with him for a while, and she agreed. They shared a quiet meal, talking about the small things, the color of the sunset, the sound of the wind in the trees, the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. It was ordinary, yet comforting, a return to simplicity after the danger and intensity of the past days. She realized then that she had grown attached to him, not in a romantic sense, but in a human sense. She cared for him deeply, felt responsible for his well-being, and was genuinely curious about the story he carried with him. Yet she also knew that he guarded that story carefully, and she respected that. Some things revealed themselves in time, and she was willing to wait. As night fell, he sat by the window, watching the stars appear one by one. The mountains loomed in the distance, silent and steady, a reminder of the journey they had shared. He turned to her, eyes thoughtful, and said, You've saved more than just me. You reminded me of something I had almost forgotten." She looked at him, curious. "What's that?" she asked softly. He didn't answer immediately, just looked out at the mountains again. Finally, he said that there are still people who act with kindness without thinking of themselves. That trust is possible. That connection matters. She felt a lump in her throat, touched by his words. "It does," she said quietly. "It really does." They sat in silence after that, two people bound by circumstance, by trust, and by the fragile threads of human kindness. She didn't yet know who he truly was or what his story held, but she felt certain that this encounter, this quiet time together, was changing both of their lives in ways they couldn't yet see. And though the future remained uncertain, she felt a quiet confidence. Some connections were meant to happen, some stories were meant to unfold slowly, and some moments, like the ones they shared in the shadow of the mountains, were meant to leave a lasting mark on the heart. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, spilling across the room where he had been resting. She entered quietly, carrying a tray with breakfast-warm tea, fresh bread, and some fruit. He was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking out the window at the mountains that stretched endlessly beyond the town. There was a calm in him now, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. "Good morning," she said softly, setting the tray down. He turned to her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Good morning," he replied. His voice had regained some strength, and there was a hint of humor in it, subtle. Almost hidden, they ate together in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds being the clinking of cups and the occasional bird outside. She noticed the way he moved, deliberate but graceful, every action measured, yet seemingly effortless. There was something about him that felt familiar and yet unplaceable. It's like a puzzle she had yet to solve. After breakfast, she suggested a short walk to help him strengthen his legs. He agreed, though hesitantly, still cautious of any sudden movements. They stepped outside into the crisp morning air, the town slowly coming to life around them. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional passerby. The mountains seemed to hold their own silent watch over the valley below. As they walked, she noticed a change in his demeanor. He was more relaxed, more open, though still reserved. Occasionally, he would glance at her, his eyes filled with a depth she could not yet understand. She felt drawn to him, not in a romantic sense, but by sheer curiosity and respect. This was a man who had survived danger, who had faced vulnerability, and yet carried himself with quiet dignity. "Have you always been drawn to the mountains?" she asked, breaking the silence. He paused, considering the question. "Yes," he said finally. "They challenge you. They make you face things about yourself you might otherwise ignore." He looked ahead at the trail, his expression thoughtful. "I needed that challenge. Maybe more than I realized." She nodded slowly, understanding. There was a truth in his words, a reflection of her own love for the mountains, though hers had always been simpler, less dangerous. "They do that," she agreed. "They show you strength you didn't know you had." They continued walking, the trail winding gently upward, though not steep enough to cause him strain. As they moved, she noticed the way people greeted him without recognizing him, the way he seemed unaware or indifferent to their attention. There was a quiet confidence in him, a calm presence that suggested experience and wisdom beyond his words. Later, as they rested on a small bench overlooking the valley, he finally spoke more openly about his past. "I've traveled a lot," he began, his voice steady, though cautious. "Seen many places, met many people. But it's rare to find someone who acts without thinking of themselves first, who cares simply because it's right." She listened quietly, sensing the weight behind his words. There was history in him, experiences that shaped his view of the world. Yet he spoke without bitterness, only observation. "People like that exist," she said softly. "You just have to find them. Or maybe they find you." He nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Perhaps," he said. "Or maybe you create them by being that person yourself." She felt a warmth in her chest, moved by his insight. There was a quiet depth to their conversation, a connection that had grown steadily over the past days. She realized that this was more than simple care or gratitude. It was a meeting of two people who recognized something in each other, a shared humanity that transcended circumstance. Over the next hours, they continued their slow exploration of the town. She guided him to a small cafe where they shared a light meal. People passed by, glancing at him curiously, though he seemed unconcerned. There was a presence about him, subtle but commanding, that drew attention without seeking it. She began to wonder who he truly was, what life had shaped him, and why he seemed so different from anyone she had ever met. Back at the inn, he requested a quiet moment alone to rest. She respected his wishes, leaving the room and waiting outside. She wandered the nearby streets, thinking about the events that had brought them together. The rescue on the mountain had been sudden, almost accidental, yet it had forged a bond between them. She marveled at the way life worked, how a single moment could change the course of days, weeks, or even years. When she returned, he was sitting by the window, gazing at the mountains once more. "I need to tell you something," he said suddenly, his voice calm but deliberate. She sat beside him, sensing the gravity in his tone. "I'm not who you think I am," he continued. "I've tried to stay unnoticed, to move quietly through the world. But circumstances have made that impossible. I need you to understand that my presence here on that mountain wasn't entirely random. And yet, your actions, your courage, have shown me something I had almost forgotten. Her heart skipped a beat, a mix of curiosity and anticipation filling her. She looked at him, urging him silently to continue. "I am someone known to many," he said slowly. "Someone whose life is often in the public eye, though I prefer it not to be. I came here seeking solitude, to escape the expectations, the attention, and to be myself, even if only for a little while. I never expected to fall, to be injured, or to meet someone like you." She blinked, processing his words. Recognition, awe, and disbelief swirled within her. The man she had rescued, the one who had seemed ordinary, was far from it. Yet in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the trust he was placing in her, the vulnerability he was showing. "Why tell me now?" she asked softly. "Why reveal this?" He looked at her, eyes steady and sincere. "Because your actions, your courage and care, changed me. You saved me, not because of who I am, but because of who you are. And that deserves honesty." She felt a lump in her throat, moved by his words. It was rare, she realized, to meet someone who spoke with such honesty, who acknowledged the truth without ego or pretense. "I didn't save you because of who you are," she said quietly. "I saved you because you needed help. That's all it ever was." He nodded, a faint smile forming. "And that is why I trust you. Why I am willing to tell you this. Most would never see beyond the surface, beyond the role I play in the world, but you see the person beneath." Silence settled between them, a quiet understanding that words could not fully capture. She felt the weight of the moment, the significance of their connection, and the extraordinary nature of their meeting. This was more than a simple rescue. It was a recognition of humanity, of courage, and of the subtle power of kindness. For the next few hours, they talked quietly, cautiously exploring the details of his life, though he remained selective, revealing only what he felt comfortable sharing. He spoke of travels, of responsibilities, of challenges faced and lessons learned. She listened, fascinated but never pressing. There was a rhythm to their conversation, a balance between revelation and respect, trust and discretion as the evening approached. The mountains glowed in shades of gold and purple, casting long shadows over the town. They stepped outside, walking slowly along a path that led to a small overlook. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. He stood beside her, silent for a moment, watching the changing light. "You've given me something I didn't know I needed," he said finally, breaking the quiet. "A reminder of what matters, of kindness, of trust, of connection. And I am grateful." She turned to him, touched by his words. "You don't need to thank me," she said softly. "You're alive. That's enough." He looked at her eyes, reflecting sincerity and something deeper, almost intangible. "It is not enough," he said quietly, "because what you gave was more than life. It was perspective. It was hope, and that is rare." The sun dipped below the mountains, leaving the sky painted in soft shades of twilight. They stood together, two people bound by circumstance, by trust, and by a shared recognition of what it meant to care for another human being. Though his true identity was now known, it did not change the connection that had formed, the respect or the subtle bond between them. That night, as they returned to the inn, she felt a mixture of awe and humility. The man she had rescued was extraordinary in ways she could not have imagined, yet their relationship remained rooted in simple human truths: courage, empathy, trust, and kindness. She realized that sometimes it was these simple acts, unnoticed and uncelebrated, that left the deepest mark. And though the days ahead would hold challenges and revelations, she knew one thing clearly: this encounter, born of chance on a mountain trail, had created a bond neither could ignore. It was a story of courage, of humanity, and of the unexpected ways that lives could intersect, leaving lasting impressions on hearts and minds alike. The morning sun poured through the windows, warming the room with a soft golden light. He was sitting by the window, sipping his tea slowly, taking in the view of the mountains. The calm that surrounded him now was different from the nervous energy he had carried when she first found him on the trail. There was a sense of balance in his movements, a quiet strength that seemed to grow with each passing day. She entered with a tray of breakfast, smiling softly. "Good morning," she said. He turned, offering a faint smile in return. "Good morning," he replied. His voice carried the ease of someone who had started to feel at home, at least in small ways, despite being far from his usual world. They ate together, the morning passing quietly. Outside, the town was waking up. The sounds of distant footsteps, the murmur of voices, the occasional ringing of a bell. Yet inside that small room, the world felt suspended, as if time had slowed for just them. She realized how much their lives had intertwined over the past days, connected by courage, care, and shared moments of silence that spoke volumes. Once breakfast was finished, she suggested a short walk to enjoy the fresh mountain air before the heat of the day set in. He agreed, now moving with confidence though still careful. As they stepped outside, she noticed the way he observed everything's the trees, the people passing by, the pattern of sunlight on the path. He noticed details that others overlooked, small moments of beauty that added layers to his quiet presence. "Do you always pay attention to so much?" she asked, smiling as they walked. He glanced at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I've learned too," he said softly. "The world has so much to show if you take the time to notice. You miss it when you rush." She nodded, realizing the truth in his words. "Sometimes it's hard not to rush," she admitted. "But moments like this, they remind you to slow down." They reached a small overlook, the valley stretching far below, rivers glinting in the sunlight and the mountains rising majestically in the distance. They stood side by side, taking in the view. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with understanding and shared experience. It was a rare kind of quiet one that was never empty, but full of meaning. "I've been thinking," he said finally, his voice thoughtful. "About what happened, about you, about how things could have gone differently." She looked at him, curious, and he took a deep breath. "If you hadn't been there, I don't know if I would have made it. You saved me, yes, but you also reminded me of something important. That there are people who act out of kindness, who help without expecting anything in return. And that changed me." She felt a warmth in her chest, touched by his honesty. "I didn't do it for recognition," she said quietly. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. That's all." He nodded slowly, a faint smile forming. "That's why it mattered so much. Because it wasn't about me, it was about you. Your courage, your empathy, that's rare." They continued their walk, speaking in small, quiet bursts, discussing ordinary things, the town, the mountains, the people they saw. Yet beneath the ordinary, there was a current of something extraordinary, a recognition of shared humanity and trust that had grown steadily between them. Later that day, as they rested in a quiet garden near the inn, he turned to her with a question that carried weight. "Do you ever think about how one small act can change everything?" She paused, considering. "Yes," she said finally. "Sometimes it's not the big gestures that matter, but the small, quiet ones. A single decision, a single choice. It can ripple through lives in ways you never imagine." He nodded, looking at her with a depth that made her heart skip a beat. "You chose to act when it counted, and because of that, everything changed. Not just for me, but for me seeing what's possible in the world." She smiled, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. "I just did what I could," she said softly. "I don't need recognition for it." His gaze held hers for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He had been rescued, yes, but there was more than survival here. There was a bond formed, a connection rooted in trust, courage, and the unspoken understanding that kindness could reach deeper than anyone realized. The following days passed with a quiet rhythm. He regained his full strength, walking the streets of the town with confidence, helping in small ways, learning the patterns of life there. She stayed by his side, guiding, supporting, and sharing small moments of laughter and conversation. Their bond grew naturally, without force or expectation, built on the foundation of what had begun on the mountain. One afternoon, while sitting on a bench overlooking the valley, he finally revealed more about why he had been traveling alone. "I needed time away," he said. "Time to think, to reflect, to step away from the world that knows me. People often see who I am publicly, but not who I am privately. I wanted to be just a man in the mountains, not a person with expectations." She listened carefully, sensing the weight of his words. "And yet," she said softly, "life brought you to me. Perhaps not by accident, but for a reason." He nodded slowly, a faint smile on his lips. "Yes," he said. "Meeting you, it reminded me that even when the world is complicated, even when life is difficult, there are still people who act with integrity, with kindness. That gives hope." She felt a lump in her throat, moved by his words. It was rare to hear someone speak with such clarity, to acknowledge the impact of simple human actions. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "What matters is that you're alive and well. Everything else is secondary." He looked at her, eyes reflecting sincerity and something deeper, almost intangible. "It is not secondary," he said quietly. "What you did, it changed me. It changed how I see the world, and I will never forget it." As the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, they walked back to the inn. The town around them was quieting for the evening, the streets bathed in soft light. They moved together in comfortable silence. Two people connected by circumstance, by courage, and by the quiet power of kindness. That night, as they sat by the window, watching the stars appear one by one, he turned to her. "You've saved more than my life," he said softly. "You've reminded me of what matters, that people can act without expectation, that trust is possible, and that connection is real." She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, moved by his honesty. "You've reminded me too," she said quietly, "that even small acts of kindness can matter more than we realize." For the first time, he looked at her without reserve, fully present in the moment, acknowledging not only her courage but the depth of her character. She realized then that the bond between them was rare, forged not by words or promises, but by action, trust, and shared experience. In the days that followed, he began to prepare to leave the town, to return to his life, which was now no longer just his own. She helped him pack, offering quiet support, and they shared moments of reflection on the journey that had brought them together. "You've changed my life," he said one morning as they stood outside, ready to part ways. "I will carry what you've shown me, always." "You've changed mine too," she replied, "not just because of what happened on the mountain, but because of who you are, and what you reminded me about human connection." They embraced briefly, a gesture of gratitude and acknowledgement, before he stepped toward the path that would lead him away. She watched him go, feeling a mixture of pride, sadness, and awe. Though he was leaving, the impact of their encounter would remain with both of them forever. As she walked back into town, she reflected on the journey to rescue, the recovery, the quiet conversations, and the deepening trust. She realized that life was unpredictable, full of moments that could change everything in an instant. And sometimes, those moments came in the form of strangers. In the mountains, in acts of courage and kindness that neither person could have foreseen. In the weeks and months that followed, she continued her life, but with a new perspective. She hiked the mountains, visited the small town, and carried with her the memory of the man she had saved. She thought of him often, wondering how his life had continued, and taking comfort in the knowledge that their paths had crossed for a reason, and somewhere, he too remembered her, the quiet woman who had risked everything to save him, who had acted without expectation, and who had reminded him of what truly mattered. Their encounter, brief yet profound, had left a lasting mark, a story of courage, empathy, and the extraordinary power of simple human connection. Life moved forward, as it always does, but both of them carried the memory of that morning on the mountain, the days that followed, and the realization that sometimes one small act of kindness could change everything. And in that realization, they both found hope, gratitude, and the quiet knowledge that humanity, at its best, could create bonds that were unbreakable, lasting and unforgettable.